you hear me?
We can. That's fantastic.
Hey, I'm sorry I'm running late. I have this meeting that I have every week with all the chiefs, the Dem chiefs at 11, and it obviously ran over because we have such challenging times right now. So,
yes, no doubt. Well, let's get started then. Welcome, everyone. My name is Craig Volden. I'm a professor of public policy and politics at the Batten School at the University of Virginia. I also serve as the co-director of the Center for Effective Lawmaking, a partnership between UVA and Vanderbilt University. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Henry. Mike currently serves as Chief of Staff to U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. He's been active in politics and policymaking for about 3 decades, having played an instrumental role in numerous electoral and legislative victories. Today, we'll be talking about the role of experienced staff in contributing to effective lawmaking in Congress. I'll be asking Mike a series of questions based on his experiences and expertise. For those of you joining us live, you can add to the interview by posting your questions in the Q&A area at the bottom of your screens. I'll try to get to as many of those questions as I can throughout our time together. Welcome, Mike. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to our conversation we're going to have and the questions you're going to ask me, and the folks that are on, I'd love to hear what they have to say too. But thanks for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here.
Fantastic. To start, can you tell me about the career path that you've taken that's now led you to be Chief of Staff to Virginia Senator Tim Kaine?
Yeah, sure. It's a peculiar one. It's a little bit different. A lot of people that work on Capitol Hill have a long history of working here on the Hill. I'm actually I've only been here for about 7 to 8 years now. Most of my career I've spent working on political campaigns. So I've managed several Senate races, several governor's races, many congressional races. And in between there, I had some experiences when I was in college. I was an intern for a congressman, which kind of got me introduced to the Hill and why it interests me now. I was a caseworker for a senator here, former senator in Virginia, working on casework in a regional office. And then I've also worked for an environmental group and then a poverty group for a little while. But other than that, it's primarily been campaigns up until when Senator Kaine asked me to join him on his staff in 2012.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the Center for Effective Lawmaking is located at the University of Virginia, as you know, and at Vanderbilt University, where our students are highly interested in public service. As they consider perhaps exploring some staff roles in Congress, can you briefly describe the structure of a typical congressional office and what the sort of jobs they might have if they were to join?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for asking this question. The way I kind of organize our office is in kind of 5 buckets. We have a legislative team that focuses on specifically working with the senator on public policy. And the positions that we have there are the following. We have a legislative director who kind of serves as the leader and director of the entire department. We have 7 to 8 legislative assistants, which focus directly with the senator. I would say there are key person that are deep in a specific issue or policy issues that the senator works on. Now there's a little deviation there. We're not on judiciary, for example. So I have a lawyer who works with him on judiciary issues, but it's what I consider it's not a committee of jurisdiction. So although that work is really important to us and we focus on that a lot, like right now what's going on in the country, our judiciary person is working on a lot of criminal justice matters on a daily and hourly basis. But again, it's not Senator Kaine's committee of jurisdiction. So there's another set of LAs that work specifically on his committee. So we're on Armed Services, Foreign Relations, Budget, and Help, which is the Help, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. And those legislative assistants, they do have a little bit more responsibility because they have to get ready for committee hearings and they have to brief him to be more in depth on those issues. So there's kind of a deviation there amongst LA's committee of jurisdiction and then other LAs where we don't have committee of jurisdiction, but they're issues that are important to Senator Kaine. Right underneath them, we have our LCs. Those are our legislative correspondents. They work with the LAs to prepare the senator for briefing, for hearings, and also help write briefings for him. But primarily what their job is, 80 to 85% of their job is interacting with constituents either on the phone or through email, kind of answering their concerns on different issues. And then we also have a staff assistant role, which kind of focuses a little bit more on, kind of support staff here in the office. And then we do have fellows. We have three fellows every year that I think are a unique opportunity for people to come into the office for a short period of time and, help usually the committee of jurisdiction folks to get their work done. So that's the Ledge Shop. That's a deep dive department that has a lot of staff. Now, the other thing we have a press shop that focuses specifically on press and communications. We also have a casework group that works primarily out of the Richmond office, where they work out on outreach and also casework matters. For those of you who don't know what casework is, it's like when you or I have an issue with the federal government, that our caseworker can work with you and kind of solve that problem. And then the last group of folks is kind of like our administrative staff that work with me to kind of run the office and manage our resources here, both human resources and also financial.
That's great. I really appreciate that overall rundown. Looks like our audience has one question kind of
Sure.
relevant to this. How can an individual citizen most effectively communicate an opinion on a specific topic with a senator?
Yeah. So here's how I kind of approach that. And look, we get a lot of phone calls and we get a lot of mail. Mostly now it's moved all to email. We get a few hard copy letters now where people actually wrote out the letter, but that's starting to wane as people get more familiar with email. And it's also an age thing. Older folks tend to write us, younger folks don't. But that's one way. And look, our office takes that kind of incoming very seriously. I look at that as a data point on what's kind of, what's on top of mind for people. So that's one way to communicate. The other way to communicate, and I think, right now, because we're dealing with COVID and the campus right now is has no access for the public, which I don't like, but that's kind of the situation we're in, is to, people who visit us. So we have interest groups, citizens that want to come in on their own and they ask for a personal meeting either with the senator or with staff. And, we absorb a lot of that incoming and we spend a lot of time on that. And in Virginia, what I always tell my staff is that, you can try to avoid somebody who might have an issue that they want to talk to us about. I recommend that you don't avoid them, because here's the thing. If you live in Alaska and you're trying to get in touch with an Alaskan senator, that's a long plane ride or a very long car trip. But in Virginia, if you keep putting someone off, they're going to show up in our front office and they're going to confront you one-to-one if you're not careful. And that's part of what I always look at our office is that's really a public service that we should be, is that being closer to the people and making sure we have those access points where they can come in and talk to us is really important. And then the last thing is Senator Kaine does travel around the state frequently. We have open forums there as well. We're on campus probably 4 to 5 times a year at UVA alone. But that kind of interaction is important too. And then we also have what we call Kaine Connects around the state, where staff schedule time to meet with people either in a regional office or at a local library or a public place where people can come in and talk to us about what they're dealing with.
Thanks, that's really helpful. When we think about taking those issues as well as the issues that the senator is just fascinated by himself or interested in resolving, we're focused then mostly on the lawmaking role. Certainly at the center, we're interested in lawmaking, although oversight and other purposes are really central there as well. How do the legislative staff really fit into kind of a deep dive in that lawmaking role? How do they bridge the relationship between senators or representatives and those constituents, lobbyists, experts, and others?
Yeah, look, our staff are critical to our success. And here's what I mean by that. Senator Kaine is what I would call an engaged member. And I warn staff when they come to see us, or when they come to work for us, he's well-read, he is always thinking about issues. it's very common for me to have an email in the morning about something he read about in the newspaper and he wants to pursue. But the senator only has so much bandwidth because we're all human. So the key here is that to build that trust between the member and the staff person, to make sure that first they kind of understand where Senator Kaine or a member comes to an issue. So for instance, Senator Kaine is a former civil rights attorney. So civil rights issues have been like part of his DNA for almost, I think, his entire life. I didn't know him when he was a young man, but generally you kind of know where he's going to be on a certain issue. And then from there, it's important that the staff kind of craft legislation and help him, put things forward in the body that, represent his values and kind of his interests. So that's part of that kind of one-on-one interaction between the member, understanding where the member comes from on an issue, and then trying to look for opportunities for that person to advance really good ideas. But there's a lot more into legislative work and lawmaking than just having a great relationship with your boss. Having the expertise to understand how a bill becomes a law is, you can read that in a textbook, but how you practically apply that in the United States Senate is just not textbook. Like, you need to know who runs the committee. You need to know the staff on the committee. You need to look for opportunities because, like, right now, I'm a member of the Democratic Party and my boss is a Democrat. So we're not in the majority. So the majority dictates the calendar. So they're going to make a decision what's going to move and what's not. And you got to have staff that understand that, okay, hey, this bill is actually going to move because the party in the majority is going to move this legislation. How can I get an amendment in that package? Now, I'm kind of serving in a weird time. I mean, obviously with a pandemic, the civil rights challenges that we have, it's really a challenging time. But before all this happened, what was kind of frustrating to me is when I finally got to this role and serving Virginia and the nation and Senator Kaine, is that very few things move nowadays, to be honest with you. So I know there's two things that always move. It's called the National Defense Authorization Act. We have a markup next week on that bill. That moves every single year. That's a guarantee. There's going to be, the defense bill is going to move. The second thing, and we're not great on this, but generally, appropriations is going to move at the end of the year. Now, those of you who follow Congress closely, we're supposed to have that wrapped up by, September 30th. Usually we kick the can down the road for a couple of months and we finally get a deal, maybe closer to Christmas, or even sometimes it pulls into the next year. And we run the government on a CR, continuing resolution. But generally that those bills are going to move. And the question is, can you get your piece of legislation that you want to move as an amendment into one of those bills so you can move forward with that? So those are kind of some of the, deep dive kind of intricate details that you want, staff to understand the process. And it's not just, how a bill becomes a law. It's got to be like some more of the, the art that's done here in the United States Senate.
So you were describing some instances where in the minority party you can still move some of your priorities. How does it play out differently in the majority, or what you might hope in your case to be in the majority next year?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we do a lot of nominations right now, which is frustrating. We don't do a lot of legislating, but like, I'm hopeful if we get the majority back, we're going to be able to put our agenda up. And, I think it'll be an exciting time to be here, in January, if we do get the majority back. But if I can just kind of deviate just for a minute about like, even how in the minority, how you get things done.
Yeah.
Look, my boss is definitely, a progressive Democrat, and he's proud of being a Democrat, but he's also very interested in kind of finding common ground. He talks frequently about, here's a member, this is their circle, this is his circle. The question is, like, what part of those circles kind of interact with each other and overlap each other, and maybe you can find some common ground. And I'll give you a good example. And this is actually like a really strange, but like one of our, a strange story in the sense of who we were working with, but we had success last year. Up until last year, states could set the smoking age, it couldn't be under 18, but it could be 18 or somewhere between 21, but there wasn't a national standard. And part of, there's a variety of reasons for that. Some of us come from tobacco states like Virginia. Senator Kaine has always been pro, 21 on that kind of age limitation. But, we actually worked with Senator McConnell on this, and he came to us and said, hey, listen, Tim, we haven't worked on much. I'm from a tobacco state. You're from a tobacco state. Would love to work on something together with you. And look, a lot of people in our party and a lot of people even in my office was kind of like, whoa, why are we interacting with him? And, my kind of approach to this was like, why I'm going to interact with him? First of all, there are going to be some states in the country that will never change their law from 18 to 21. This is an opportunity to impact hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people by working with McConnell. And the other thing is, let's just look at the reality of this, is that if Mitch McConnell decides this bill is going to move, it's going to move. Like, he's going to put it on the calendar and we're going to get a vote on it. And here's a unique opportunity to work with someone who's in a power position to get something on the calendar. And we ended up passing that last year. And it was like, one of our best, opportunities. Now, we don't agree with Mitch on much, but that was like a unique opportunity, even in this very divisive time that we live in, to get something done that was positive. And that's something that I'm really proud of, from last year. And that's just like one good example of like how, and remember, it wasn't just like how a bill becomes a law type stuff.
Right.
It was really like understanding how this place works.
Right. That idea of, where are there bipartisan opportunities? Often we in the public think, yeah, it's never happening. And you're suggesting that it does happen. The contentiousness across party lines certainly shows up in the press. How are you finding that within the Senate itself? And especially, do we see it among senators, among staffers? Are there some staffers who aren't interested in working across party lines, or how do they overcome those?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question, and I've thought about this a lot over the years. What's frustrating about this? Look, I love my job. I love working here, and I'm very fortunate to be here. But there are some staff that I will say that the member probably gives them a little bit too much influence about what goes on and what doesn't go on. And it's frustrating when you deal with that, because there are here's how I kind of approach things. When Tim Kaine says, hey, this is the way it's going to be on this piece of legislation, or this is what I want, or this is what I've agreed to, or here's what I've given to them, but this is what we've got, what we've received from this deal. I kind of look at it, hey, conversation's over. Now it's time just to implement and get this thing done and get a vote on it. But, I have run into situations where, staff has started to roll things back and say, oh, well, that's not what we agreed to. And, it's frustrating. So, look, you're never going to take politics completely out of legislative creation, but, we could dial it back here a little bit.
Yeah. And
from me coming from a political space until I got here, I think people, if they just dial the politics back 25% or so, we could get a lot more done. But it can be challenging at times, and it does piss me off sometimes, to be honest with you.
Sure.
To be frank.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another challenge a lot of scholars and interested parties have been pointing to is the revolving door nature of congressional staff service. Kind of the staff members don't typically serve for very long. Many are drawn away from Congress to serve as lobbyists or in other more lucrative roles. How much of an issue are these concerns from your perspective?
It's concerning. Look, I've been in the Senate now since 12, so I'm coming on 8 years now. And I'm one of the older people now. I had a colleague that worked with me in the first 6 years of Senator Kaine's time here, was my legislative director. She was a year of the Senate for 25 years, and she just, recently retired. And, Mary was a really good colleague of mine, a good ally of mine. But the reason why we were a good team is that, I had very little Senate experience when I took this job. She had 20-something years at that point of Senate experience, and she taught me a lot. So now I'm able to what I learned from her and you know, kind of implement it now and apply it now. But I think more and more what you're seeing is, you know, for people to really achieve their own personal financial goals. And Mary had a great career, and she's out doing something else now that she likes to do. But when people only are here for 5 to 6 years and then they go downtown, it does take a little bit of the institutional experience that is really critical to this place. And what you're seeing right now in the Senate is, you know, there's some reforms that have happened recently about judges, about Supreme Court nominees, that, you know, we're starting to erode kind of the rules that have been in place for the Senate for a reason, to bring people together, to find consensus. And we're starting to get away from that. And I think part of that is the members' fault, but a lot of it also is the staff they have to take some responsibility in this. And when we don't have someone who can go back and say, hey, you know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, this is the reason why we had this rule in place and why we shouldn't change. And that's one part. And then the other part is, like I said earlier, you know, the relationships on the Hill matters. Like Mary could call up anybody, you know, she knew all the folks in the Senate and had that Rolodex. And when someone leaves to go downtown, that's great for the interest group that they're going to work for, or the lobbying group that they're going to work for. But it's not that great for here, because we're losing that kind of, you know, those connections that help this place run.
Yeah. Going back to our audience questions, there's one here that's kind of linked to some of those challenges. What parts of your job do you find most challenging, and why?
Yeah, you know, the chief of staff role is an interesting role, and again, very fortunate to have it. But what's challenging with my job is to set, set goals that the senator wants to reach legislatively. Also, and how we're going to communicate that to people. But my job that, you know, takes up a lot of my time and people don't realize is, yes, I serve as an advisor to Senator Kaine. Yes, I, you know, work with my team to get his legislative goals accomplished or to communicate it properly. But, you know, I spend a lot of my time on the blocking and tackling of management. And that is, right, you know, making sure we pay the bills, making sure, you know, we hire the right people. You know, in any kind of organization, you're always going to have disagreements with folks, and trying to mediate and be part of that. But, you know, a lot of human relations, I spend a lot of time on, you know, managing my staff, and, you know, that's fun, and I enjoy it, but, you know, it's not that glamorous all the time. And you know, sometimes I wish I could spend a little bit more time on the deep dive on legislation than I can, but you know, that's not what my role is. So.
Yeah, you were talking about some members who give a lot of delegation to their staff, you know, just kind of run with it, do what you think is best, and others that, you know, are more directive. You know, I don't know if that goes into the micromanaging category as well. Yeah, how do you think about, you know, the right amount of discretion to give to staff?
Yeah. And look, I can only speak to my experience, yeah, and kind of how I do it. But look, what I always try to do is the people that are on my legislative team, I want them to be the experts on the subject matter. So, you know, I give them a lot of leeway. And Senator Kaine does to a certain extent. Now, look, I mentioned it earlier, and I think anybody who's in public life, you know, and many of you, I think, are thinking about careers, you know, either in the executive or other, or the legislative branch. You know, your boss is always going to set the kind of parameters and the standard, and then you need to go to them with options. And that could be, you know, here's something that's perfect, and this is everything you want, but it's going to be unlikely to move, so we have to, you know, maybe deviate slightly, and here's some things you could give away. But I really do allow our staff to kind of drive that, because, you know, I'm never going to become an expert on, you know, a military issue like my military LA can, or my judiciary person, or my budget person, or my, you know, appropriations person. And you really want them to be the expert. And so I give them a lot of space on that. And Senator Kaine does too. But, you know, like when we get into hiring processes right here, I do tell people, like, look, you know, let's say you think this is the perfect thing, and Senator Kaine says, hey, I really appreciate all the work you did, but I'm going to go this way instead of this way. how's that going to make you feel? And I do think as professionals, we all have to realize that at the end of the day, your principal, your member is going to be the one who's going to make that ultimate decision on which way to go. And that's how we operate. Now, I will tell you, I mean, there are some offices that I question, like who's really running the show over there, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. Now, some of the research that we're doing in the Center for Effective Lawmaking is suggesting that having even one very experienced legislative staffer who spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill dramatically improves the lawmaking effectiveness of members of Congress, and that effect is strongest for new members. What do you see as the struggles that newly elected senators and representatives face, and how can staff help them overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so Mary is a great example, my former colleague. She was a perfect fit for us. We avoided so many pitfalls, like those first couple of years where we're just kind of understanding, the Senate and how things happen around here and why things happen around here. So, we really benefited from having a veteran like Mary to help us for the first 6 years. And like I said, she then also trained me well. And she also, I still have many members on my legislative team that she hired, and, her experience was passed on to them. So the point you made is very important. And I encourage new members, sometimes they'll call me and ask me like what I think and how you should do it. I mean, I do recommend that. Now, here's what generally happens though. People usually come to the body either in the Senate or in the House with, people from other, things that they worked on. So for instance, you usually have a campaign that you're loyal to, you're proud of, they got you here to serve in the House or the Senate, and they bring a lot of campaign staff on. Now this is kind of interesting because I am a campaign person, right? And that's kind of what Senator Kaine did for me. But my point is that, you can bring some of your congressional staff on. I think that's perfectly fine. But you got to limit that. So if you bring everybody from the campaign to here, here's what's generally going to happen. In about 6 months, there's going to be a lot of turnover because there's going to be things that they just don't understand. And here's the other thing. Campaign people tend to not like the work that we do up here. And so they've been trained differently. They have different interests. And it hurts the effectiveness of your office. So my best advice is, bring a third of your people with you and put them in roles that, that are similar to how a campaign works. But what you really want is for your ledge team to have experience to understand, how we move legislation up here and how the system works, and try to really hire top-notch legislative people, because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be judged on, as a member in the House or the Senate. But I see a lot of mistakes like that happening, and then you see some major turnover, and it's usually predictable.
Yeah, we really are enjoying this conversation. We're getting a lot of Q&A now, so I'm going to turn to a bunch of those. It seems like these conversations are resonating with people. One of the questions is, do you have suggestions for how members might better retain those experienced staff?
Yeah, here's what we do here. And again, I can't speak to every office, but I really try to hire people that are we and not me. So I spend a lot of time, in the interview process. We make sure that your topics, your subject matter, and make sure you can write and that kind of stuff. But I focus a lot of my attention on, are you going to be a good member of our team? And I think, what you have to do to retain people is, treat people well, be very clear about what their responsibilities are, how they fit into the team. But, campaigns and also, legislative offices, sometimes they attract people that are a little bit more I than we, and that's what I try to avoid here. So I really try to find the right fit for everybody. Mm-hmm. Now, and here's the other thing you need to be I'll be up front with everybody on the video conference right now, is that, look, you're not going to be rich, working for a United States Senator or a House member or a governor or a member of the state legislature or wherever you want to go. This is not, you don't come here to obtain wealth. You got to come here with like, with a servant heart and that you want to be a public servant. And I do try to also, encourage people that. So like I'm never going to compete with a salary downtown. Like that's ridiculous. People can walk out the door tomorrow and they're going to make twice as much as they, or maybe even 3 times as much as they make here. So I'm just very upfront about that and honest. And look, I also encourage my staff, like, look, let me know like what you're dealing with in your life. Like, I want to be an asset for you to try to help you reach your professional goals, whether they're here in this office or in other offices or even downtown. So I try to, encourage people, but when you're first starting out, this is about, public service. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean you're going to have the largest paycheck in the neighborhood,
Yeah, it looks like another question is interested in this idea about delegation and that concept of, you seem to know or can hear stories of those who are delegating a lot to their staff, giving them a lot of discretion to move things forward and so on. If we as scholars were interested in detecting that, would we see different patterns for those who delegate to their staff a lot versus those who, have staff who are really attuned to the member?
It's hard. Part of also confidentiality and working with your staff, and you would probably have to be in the body to pick up on that. I don't think you would see that just, from the outside looking in.
Yeah. One other question here, do all senators have the same size staff? If not, how is that determined?
Sure, great question. So we all have a stipend that is assigned to us from the federal government to run our offices. There are states that we call big states, like they're big, Texas, New York, California. They will have larger staffs. And part of that is because they have more regional offices. They need to have a larger state staff to kind of deal with the case workload that's coming in. So yeah, and the way that's calculated is, believe it or not, distance from the capital, population, and that's how you receive more resources to interact with your state and with your constituents. So yeah, I mean, Virginia is kind of medium. So, and we're very close. So the travel is different and the costs that we have to accrue are different. So we have smaller staff, but generally my staff is basically like 48 to 52 people at any given time with the fellows that come in.
Right.
But you'll see New York and Texas and California will be slightly larger in the 60, 65, even 70 range.
Right. Any differences when you're in the minority or majority party? It seems like you were saying those roles are a bit different.
They are, but you have the same amount of staff if you're in the majority or minority. I mean, there's a case to be made that the offices are a little bit better when you're in the majority in leadership. Like it doesn't change here. This is all based on seniority, the offices that you get now. But they're working in the speaker's office is better than working in a member's office for sure.
Turning to a couple contemporary issues that we're all thinking about. So obviously the whole world is confronting this strange new reality in the current pandemic. How's it affecting the work of Congress and the role of congressional staff? Are people working from home? Are they working in the office? What precautions are being taken? How does all of this affect the important role that Congress should and is doing during the crisis? Yeah,
great question. It's been a fascinating time to work here. So right now, one other thing to remember, this is the best way to explain this thing. Remember, all the members of the Senate, we're all small business owners, basically. So we run our offices the way we want to run our offices, but there's no standard across the way. I will say that generally the Democrats are a little bit more teleworking. I would honestly say that there are some other Republican offices that are a little bit more, haven't changed that much, but it's definitely the pandemic has impacted us in major ways and put challenges in front of us that we've never had to deal with, at least for a very long time. So how my office is being run right now, I'm in my office right now. This is my, where I work in the Senate. But we have closed our office and we are 100% teleworking. Now, the only difference, the only adjustment to that is that I do come in and staff the senator when we have votes. So for instance, right now the Senate votes Monday night is usually the first vote, and the last vote is Thursday afternoon. So I will come in around 1 or 2, prepare for him to come in. He'll vote, he'll go home. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I come in basically normal hours and I work with him on making sure we get him to votes, to committee hearings, and what have you. I came in today because I have a better camera here to work with you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, but right now it's one person who comes in and staffs him when we have votes. When we're in recess, I will be working 100%, teleworking like everybody else on my team. And look, it's been a really an amazing experience. First of all, we had to change. There was no rule book for this. There was no like, oh, here's the book, here's how you do it. There wasn't. We had to like craft our plan and implement it within 24 hours of having everybody work remotely. I didn't know how it was going to end up, but I will tell you, I am like very proud of everybody I work with. Our efficiency, our ability to interact with constituents, our ability to move legislation has not been encumbered at all. And it's really been a testament to like the people I work with. They've really figured out how to work remotely, do everything over the phone or through video conference. I think there's a little bit of, you kind of miss your colleagues and
right.
It's a lonely existence at times, but they've really done a great job. And I've not seen any dip in, responsive time to constituents. I haven't seen any responsive time dip with what things that Tim Kaine needs. We have to do things differently. He has to be a little bit more self-sufficient in understanding how to turn Zoom on and everything like that. Yeah. But we've done a really good job. And, I care about their well-being and their health. So I want to, I'm not rushing to get back to the way it was right now. I want to make sure everybody's safe. And even though we had to turn on a dime and immediately implement a teleworking, I'm pretty certain my posture on this is going to be, we're going to ease back in to working in the office once things get a little bit back to normal.
Do you have a sense on any timeline for that, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer. What people were asking me on my staff call today.
Yeah,
I mean,
I suppose.
We were going to file the state rules, which was basically, stay at home until June 10th. I'm going to move that out another week. And I think what we're going to end up happening here is that it's hard. I wish I could take the camera around and show you like kind of the situation is, but we in Russell, in the Russell office building, it's kind of old school. So we have 3 offices or 3 buildings here in Dirksen, Hart, and Russell. Russell was the first one built, so it's very much like a typical government building. I cram in in one office room, I may have 7 staffers there. There's no way to effectively have 6 feet and, so we're going to have to do some sort of, maybe this group of people work on this week and then the following week they'll take off or they'll work from home and then the new group will come in. There's no way that in Russell I can have everybody here and still keep everybody safe. So we're likely to have a staggered approach in the future.
Would there be a testing regime, et cetera, that you would have?
I haven't figured that out yet because, they've given us, masks and hand sanitizer and stuff, but I don't know if there's a budget for me to have thermometers here and test people. And I definitely right now don't have access to tests. Mm-hmm. So I think I probably would have to get my own thermometers, which I could, and then go from there for at least see if someone has a fever. But but no, there are not
So there's no organized Senate-wide or congressional-wide response along those lines. You're on your own like any small business?
And look, I think it's probably slightly better than a small business because I could, focus on that and push maybe the office of attending physician to figure this out. But no, we have not been given like, oh, here's, 150 tests that you guys can take to make sure everybody is set. Yeah.
Another contemporary issue, we're all struggling with the rioting, racial disparities in policing, in health access, in outcomes, and who's being hit by the economic hardships. Do you think Congress and its staff are well equipped to handle those sorts of concerns as well?
Look, I think we're all human, so our office specifically, I think, we look out for each other, and we're trying to, make sure people have avenues to communicate with either their team or their leadership, the people they directly report to. But it's a very challenging time. Are we thinking about, one thing that we have that maybe the general public doesn't have is that, we have an outlet to legislate and to change things through legislation. And I do think there is some therapeutic grounding for that a little bit, that you feel like you can make a difference because we can change the laws here. But no, we're dealing with this time in real time, just like everybody else is. In time of isolation and not being able to, hang out with a friend and just, connect like normal human beings instead of through a phone or through a conference like this, it's hard. But my team's doing well. We're very similar to what you guys are dealing with. I do think that outlet of, hey, we're working on a bill right now with Senator Booker to fix this is helpful to us because we can see that there's opportunity for progress.
Thanks. Some of our research and research of other scholars has suggested that underrepresented minorities and women as congressional staff are less likely to be promoted and that they receive lower pay. In some ways, that kind of reflects some of the patterns in the American workforce more generally. But is there anything specific to Congress that might help us understand those sorts of patterns?
Yeah, I think as your member and then your chief of staff and then your kind of direct reports, which would be my leadership team who run the departments with me. Look, we have to be held accountable to make sure that we don't fall into those traps. And, I spend a great deal of time thinking about, the diversity that we have in the office. And I also, I spend a lot of time focusing on, salary range and making sure things are done fairly. But we have a lot of work to do in Capitol Hill, and it's hard. And in the Senate specifically, this is a very Caucasian operation, and that's another thing that pisses me off a lot. And I have to spend a lot of time, looking for talent and finding people to encourage them to come here and work here. But we have a long way to go, and you guys can see the numbers on that about not only the membership, the makeup of the body itself, but also staffing. But I am proud of our numbers. I mean, we have a very diverse staff. It's a goal of Senator Kaine's, and it's a goal of mine to make sure we maintain that.
Yeah, what some things specifically that you do to achieve more success on those fronts?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what's happened in the past and why you have it's hard to break in here. I mean, when there's a vacancy that happens on staff, right? If you don't have the pipeline of diverse candidates completely from the staff assistant to the chief of staff, if you don't have that pipeline already put in place, usually when a vacancy happens, you're like, holy cow, I need this LC right now to cover this body of work because we're in the middle of a markup and I need help right away. And what you do is you immediately look to the person who's in your office who may be further down the chain and try to pull them up. But if you don't have diversity in those ranks, you're just going to naturally pull from who is ever there. So that's one, pitfall. So I really don't do that. Like, we always open up our opportunities and try to see who else is out there. And then also, making sure you have managers that are diverse as well, that, are watching this 100% and, making sure that, from whatever walks of life that you come from that, hey, this is a great place to work and you should do it. And encourage people to enter public service. And, that's, you can never take off from that. You got to be working on that 24/7 every single day.
Yeah, yeah. Now, on the House side, the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress has been considering these sorts of issues, staff pay, a variety of other reforms. On the Senate side, or for the Congress as a whole, are there reforms that are needed generically to make the institution function better, whether those have to do with staff or other considerations? What's your ideal work in Congress today?
What'd you say again? I'm sorry.
What's your ideal for a working Congress today?
Yeah, that's a tough question. On reforms, look, the way I look at kind of the brain drain of people who leave the Hill and go on and do other things, I mean, higher salaries would be great, would be helpful. But you're still not going to be able to compete financially, even if you did boost everything up a little bit. So I think we have to keep that in mind that, people need to come here, with patriotism and thinking about hey, I want to be a public servant, and, trying to maintain, upward trajectories so they can reach their goals and do things, in the public sector. But, it's hard for me right now to rattle off just a series of reforms, but look, if you guys come up with some good ideas, I'm definitely interested in looking at them. And look, the Senate is a very, ancient place. I mean, we move very slowly here. So sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Would I like it to be a little bit more, more dynamic and changing more? I certainly would, but there's the way the rules are set up right now, it does, prohibit you sometimes from doing things.
Yeah. Looks like we aren't going to be able to get to all of the Q&A, but I do want to bring in a bunch more before our time is up. So here's one. What are the differences between staff who work for a specific senator and the staff who work on a committee?
Yeah. So, the difference primarily is that you'll see people who work on the committee, or remember I talked a little bit about, committees of jurisdiction and then staff that are kind of working on issues that are important to the senator, but not in a committee. You're going to get a deep dive if you're working on, in the Foreign Relations Committee. And for instance, and not only do you just work on foreign relations, you're going to have expertise in a specific, region of the world. So it's, while the work that we do here at times can be very specific, it's still very broad. But when you get into the discipline of, working on a committee, you get a deep dive and even, sectors of that issue. And then look, the other exciting thing about working on a committee is, if you are into healthcare and you're on the health committee staff, you can really make a difference on moving legislation, because now you're working with the chair and the ranking staff and the chair of the committee and the ranking person from the other party to really move things. So you get into the deep dive, and it's really exciting because you can move legislation. We're a senator who's on a committee can still impact it, but the committee staff really is where, the legislation gets drafted, worked on, where the deals are done, where the give and take is. And, I've never personally worked there, but, I think it would be very exciting and would be worth doing.
Great. Question here about outside advocacy and lobbyists. How skeptical are you of the points that advocates and lobbyists bring to you? Is that typically a good partnership? How can you gain confidence that they're kind of telling you the truth and that it's a position that the senator should be supporting?
Yeah, great question. Advocacy is really important to our system. So I welcome it, and I think it's good. Now, there are some lobbyists and some interest groups that we may not agree with in general, and there's some conflict there occasionally. But it's really important that every office allows that advocacy to happen. Now, you know, I always tell my staff, and the way I approach it is, look, we should entertain almost every you know, person who comes to our office who's interested in petitioning their government and making a case on why their position is the right position to support. But so we get to listen, but at the end of the day, we have to listen and take that information, you know, analyze it and decide if it's the right information or not. And that's on us. And, you know, but having people come in and talk to us, whether they're a paid lobbyist or, you know, a volunteer advocacy group, you know, it's important for our system to have that kind of outside pressure. But as a public servant and somebody you're working with, a senator or a House member, you know, you've got to analyze it yourself and decide if this is important or not. And then also, like, sometimes people have an argument and half their argument is good, the other half isn't. So do you want to just kind of try to advance, you know, parts of their agenda? But I'm still excited about that, and that's a really important part of the system here.
Yeah.
Now it can be frustrating because, you know, people really, you know, are aggressive, but that's, you know, that's why we're here. You know, I mean, that's, you know, you can't complain about that.
Right.
People can be aggressive.
Sure. In terms of the expertise of staff, you were saying, you know, some are dedicated to healthcare and so on. Where do they get that expertise? Is it before they arrive? How do they cultivate it and build it across their time in Congress as serving as a staff member?
Sure. So if you're just starting out, yes, if you are really interested in foreign relations, health policy, judiciary work, civil rights, environment, you know, getting an understanding of those issues while you're, you know, in college is very, very helpful. And it's a good way to start. But here's the one thing that is really important, and I always like to say this to groups like this, is like, you know, your writing skills are critical. So as you're preparing to kind of move into a legislative role, or you want to start your public service career, you have time right now in college. If you have time right now in college to improve your writing skills, you should. Because this place, especially in Tim Kaine's office, writing for him is really important, because you're not going to always have the time. Like, I'm different. I can go in and say, hey, Tim, you know, here's what I think, okay? And that's our relationship. But there are some staffers who have that as well. But a lot of times you got to say, hey, here's the piece of paper, read it, because he's really moving really quick. So being able to articulate your point, you know, concisely, accurately, and give him some options on a piece of paper is really important still, or an email. So I just want you to remember that as much as it's important for you to get some sort of base understanding of a different issue or so, being able to write well is really, really important. So please, if you're a junior, sophomore, you know, work on your writing skills and improve your writing skills, because that'll help you get a job up here.
Love to hear that, because of what we're asking our students to do time and time again, and hearing it from your side is going to reinforce that. One more question here. Maybe somebody who's looking for a job. What can I do to stand out in an application, or as a good intern or a staff applicant?
Sure. So getting some experience is important. And look, that experience can be getting an internship up here, or, you know, other legislative experiences that you've had even in the state legislature or city council or local government. All that counts. And look, it's challenging, and I'm going to tell you something. You need to network. Like, trying to get your first job on the Hill or trying to get an internship, you know, networking with people. So who else works on the Hill that went to UVA, for instance? You know, there's a very active alumni group up here that you can tap into, and you got to kind of build those networks. This place can be clubby at times. And what I mean by that is, you know, hey, I know somebody, and that's a way for you to get a job or an opportunity. But it's not like that all the time, and you got to just like really think about your strategy. Here's one other thing that's important. Have a broad approach to your search. I know that people will say, hey, I have to work for this one person, and I appreciate that. But remember, that one office only has 50 jobs, and, you know, 40 of them you're not even qualified to have yet. So and the other thing is, we're not like Google or, you know, Facebook, where, oh, I'm going to build out 30% more capacity in my foreign relations team this year. Generally, someone has to move out before you move in. So in order to compete for these jobs, you got to build out your network of people who are willing to help you. And I'm one of those people who are willing to help you. But you got to think about a broad approach. Get your first opportunity in the Senate or in the House and do the best job you possibly can. And then a year later, leapfrog to the next job, whether it's an LC or an LA position. But you're going to have to build up some experience in order to get that really great job with that really great member that you've been excited about for years.
Great. I'd love to get to more questions, but I'm also sensitive of the important work you're doing and your time there. So thanks so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us, Mike. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Hey, really, thanks for the opportunity. And if I could just say one last thing.
Absolutely.
Is everybody, it is so important if you're into public service that you do it now. You're young, you're just getting started in your career. A lot of times because of these, the pay scale here is you're not going to be able to come back at it when you're my age, when you have kids and you have a mortgage and stuff. But getting into public service right now, when you're first starting out, is a real opportunity for you. And you should, try to do that now. Don't wait. And then the last thing is we need good people from all walks of life and from every party. And I just hope that with the challenges that we're facing in this country, your generation is going to be the one that's going to get us out of it. So I really hope you continue to pursue your dreams and get involved as much as you can right now, because the country desperately needs, new young people to come on and start serving in a public service format. So thanks.
Great close for that. And thanks to all of those of you who have joined us live with your questions and who are watching this video. If you want to learn more about the Center for Effective Lawmaking or how effective your members of Congress have been as lawmakers, or even to explore ways to contribute to the center's mission, please visit our website, www.thelawmakers.org. Thanks again, Mike, and thanks for everyone for joining us today.
See you guys. Bye.